Good evening, everybody. A warm welcome to the ADHD Richmond and Kingston annual meeting for 2021. It's really great to see so many of you joining us this evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Annette Wilson and I'm chair of ADHD Richmond and Kingston. With that, I think I'm going to just kick off and firstly say welcome to all our families and the professionals who work very closely with us. We're also joined this evening by a sort of group of people from the wider community who've expressed an interest. And so it's really lovely to have more people join us and learn more about what we're doing. So a warm welcome to everybody. Who don't know us that well. For those of you who are new to us, I wanted to just highlight that we're really a support community, and we really feel quite strongly about the community aspect because we very much work together, and we believe so strongly in the support that we can provide to one another. We focus very much on parents, and people often say to me, it's typically from around about age 4 to about 21. We've got sort of 3 main pillars to our work, which you can see at the bottom of the slide. We focus on knowledge sharing and providing information, advocacy, and empowerment. And that is empowerment of parents, but also the children and young people with ADHD. So that's sort of really just a bit of background. I also should add, we've had an extremely busy year this last year. As with COVID, the demand for our services have increased significantly, but also organizationally, we've been incredibly busy. So that's one of the things we're going to be sharing with you in terms of what we've been up to. So looking at our agenda this evening, start off by just looking at what we've done the last 12 months. Then we're going to look at our plans for the year ahead, and then we'll have the book launch and the panel discussion on girls and women with ADHD. So for those of you who, just to give you a bit of background information, I thought we'd start off with just looking at the objectives we set last year for ourselves as an organization. And this very much started when we sat down about 15 months ago and really looked at where we were going as an organization. At that stage, we had been running for 18 years as a voluntary support group, which is actually quite amazing if you think, there was really very little funding. We had no employees, everybody was contributing on a voluntary basis. And the strategic review we did 15 months ago really highlighted that the work we do, we did a detailed survey from our users, and the overwhelming response was that we really provide support to families and professionals that are not available elsewhere. And so we set about as a group and decided we needed to make ourselves long-term sustainable. So when we started the year, we basically said there are 2 key things that we need to focus on. Obviously, the first is our service delivery, and providing our core service offering. But then the second is really to start with this whole process of building our infrastructure to make us long-term sustainable. And to do that, we highlighted 4 sort of main areas that we wanted to focus on. Firstly, building the team. Secondly, raising money. Building the IT infrastructure and help develop a database. And then finally, finding an office. So looking at what we've done, we've covered the following. So our core service delivery, you will see that we moved everything to a virtual offering at the beginning of the year. This was in March last year, as soon as lockdown took place. But we also, in the last year, have seen that our families have had an incredibly difficult time. I mean, for an array of reasons, but it is particularly challenging when you've got a child with ADHD in the current situation. So we also saw there was a significant demand for our services. And you can see from this slide that the number of participants in almost all our activities almost doubled. So it was a really very busy time for all of us. The other area we were also very busy with is our advocacy services, which is something that we've done really since the early stages. We've been really active and engaging with both statutory service providers, so groups like Achieving for Children in Richmond and Kingston, but also the NHS, but also the wider voluntary sector and various forums, so both nationally and locally. Obviously, we put a lot of effort in the local support. And so we're really very proactive in engaging with these groups. And I think, what people often don't realize is what we do behind the scenes, because, obviously our activities are very visible. But what we do behind the scenes, I think, should not be underestimated in terms of alerting everybody to what the issues are. And we get this very much driven by day-to-day experiences. We work very closely with families on one-to-one advice clinics, or we have workshops and seminars, and we also have a closed Facebook forum. So we get a lot of feedback from families as to what the issues are, and that is very much what drives the agenda. And equally, we have very helpful discussions with the professionals who we work with, and they've also work with us on a collaborative basis. So I think, the main focus of our advocacy work is really to raise awareness of what's, the issues are, but then also we proactive in putting forward recommendations. Organizationally, we have seen a step change in the organization, and I must say I am incredibly proud of what me and the team have achieved. It's been an amazing year. The first thing we did was we transitioned from a voluntary group to a charity. You can see last year in March, we registered as a charity with a charity commission. The next step was to get our first grant funding in, which was fantastic. You can see we were backed by 3 local endowments, RPLC, Barnes Fund and Hampton Fund. And I must say we are hugely grateful for the support they've given us, because they believed in what we, the vision we had for the organization. And without that support, we wouldn't have been able to move the organization forward in the way we have. So as a result of getting the first grant funding, we were managed to hire our first part-time ops manager. We initially got some of the money drip feed, so we had our first sort of engagement was a 9-hour contract, and then we ended up, as the money came in, we upped it to a part-time position of 20 hours a week. So it's still very much a part-time role. And as a result of the funding, it meant that we could then start building the team and broadening the number of volunteers and start putting policies and procedures in place, and similarly start building our IT infrastructure. So this is the Board of Trustees. We are a board of 6 members. The last year, we've recruited 3 more trustees. We've got Dav Frank, who's our new treasurer. He took over from Ian Reid, who was our treasurer the last few years. And Ian has very kindly agreed to stay on the Board of Trustees. In addition, we had Miranda Lewis join us, who's got a wealth of information in the voluntary sector and also in research. So she is supporting us on a number of, running surveys and member sort of interviews and case studies and so on. And then we've also got Tim Cooper, who joined us, who's got a very broad operations management experience, from his professional background, but also got a keen interest in IT. They joined us with Ian, who I've already mentioned, and then Claire Mullane, who's our secretary. I must say all the trustees are incredibly hands-on. So they all volunteer for our various activities. And I think, obviously we form a governance board, which is incredibly important, but I think the hands-on support we get from all the trustees should not be underestimated. And the other thing I think about the trustees, which is incredibly helpful, is they've all got children with ADHD or an associated neuro condition. So they fully understand the challenges that our families are dealing with. This is our team. I've highlighted the 4 pictures you can see are really our 4 core team members. So we've got Rebecca Clegg, who's our operations manager. Rebecca's also on the call this evening. She joined us in December when we had a transition, when our previous ops manager, who was Claire, who's just to her right, she was our first ops manager, but Claire actually moved to New Zealand. And as a result of that, Claire moved into the IT manager role as she was leading our IT infrastructure build. Claire has done an amazing job, under quite a difficult situation. If you can imagine, moving countries and dealing with a huge time difference is actually, quite difficult. And then we also have got, apologies for that, we've also got Sonia Whitticase, who's joined us this month. Sonia's coming in as our project lead on the communications side, because Claire's going to be standing down as our IT manager, and she will transition into a voluntary role for us, obviously on a significantly reduced time commitment base, but still it's wonderful to see Claire continuing and for Sonia to come in. We'll talk more about what Sonia is going to be working on later this evening. And then finally, Val Ivens, who's our family support lead, who I think most families and professionals who work closely with us will know Val. Val's been involved with ADHD Richmond and Kingston from the earliest days and has done a tremendous amount in terms of building the organisation, both from a reputation point of view, but also working with our families. And in fact, Val's on the panel this evening when we talk about the book launch. So you will hear more from Val later. And then in addition to our 4 core team members, we also have 12 volunteers who are really part of the core group of volunteers who each do a very particular function, and we work incredibly well together as a team. But I think this whole team, people should not underestimate the commitment that people have given. I think we were really fortunate with the last year, where we've actually reached out into the broader community to try and find volunteers who had very specific skill sets, because we needed some specialist skill sets to help us build the infrastructure. And so we were very fortunate to attract people who actually didn't know anything about ADHD, but they had the right skills and were willing to, share their experiences with us and their skill set, but also volunteer extensive amount of their time. As I said, I think everybody has contributed hugely, but what I would like to do is really just highlight the IT infrastructure team, which was led by Claire and supported by Dan Foley, who worked really closely with Claire on the IT infrastructure build. We're going to talk later about our booking system and our database, but Claire and Dan spent the last year working on that, so it was a significant piece of work. And also to Melanie Delarouche, who worked with us on a lot of the templates for our newsletter and so on, which I'm also going to refer to a bit later. So I just wanted to mention that particular team, and I don't want to detract from any of the contributions other people have done, but a big thank you. And what we are seeing tonight is actually really Claire, Dan and Melanie stepping down from the significant time commitments that they've given. And, obviously we'll love to stay in touch with them. And as I said, Claire's going to continue as a volunteer for us. This is really just, I thought I'd just quickly run through the key changes on the IT platform, which we put through to improve access and really help us support the growing demand on our services. So the first thing was we substantially enhanced our newsletter, and as you can see on the left-hand side, it's our old newsletter. On the right-hand side, it's our new newsletter. What we did on the newsletter is we really improved it, how it looked, visually, or in terms of its formatting, but also in terms of its content. And I'm sure most of you who did it regularly will agree, we've really upped the quality and the level of communication that we put out in our newsletter. The next area is the way we've significantly enhanced our webinars, and we do recordings of them, which are then available for people to watch at a later stage. And you can see we hugely professionalized the way we've done. We work with one of our volunteers, George Tate, who's doing the editing for us. But once again, you can see it's just much more accessible for people to be able to watch the videos. The next is our newly launched booking system and integrated database, which can be accessed through our website. You can see at the top there, top right-hand corner on this visual, where you log in and you register. We announced this new booking system and integrated database on the weekend. And so if you haven't registered with us yet, please do so. This project is, has made a huge difference to, our service delivery. It's hugely important, really twofold. The one is so that we can aggregate data for our funders, which is incredibly important, particularly as we either provide a lot of our services for free, or alternatively, they charge at a really modest price. But we wouldn't be able to do that if we didn't have this data, which we could share with our funders, so that they could, make sure that they're backing, the work we are doing. And then secondly, obviously, also making it much more accessible and making the bookings for yourselves much easier. So nowadays, once you've registered, you'll see there's a lovely dashboard and you can see which activities you've booked on, and so on. So hopefully I've given you enough information to encourage as many people as possible to register on our database. And then finally, we're in the process of implementing a cloud-based accounting package, which is being led by Dav Frank, our new treasurer. And Dav's just been absolutely terrific. And he's working very closely with one of our finance volunteers, Fatima, and also Mark, who's been with us for the last year. But they each are doing slightly different functions on the finance side. but I know they're supporting they're supporting Dav on implementing the new accounting package, which I think is going to make life much easier in terms of just the day-to-day management of our finances. The next area we've really had great success over the last year is accessing new funding and broadening the resources. So as I mentioned to you earlier, we got funding about 12 months ago from Richmond Parish Land, Barnes Fund and Hampton Fund. We're very fortunate that we've also just received funding from Garfield Weston Foundation, which is backing the work we're going to do in this forthcoming year. And they are also supporting the work, the renewal funding we've got from RPLC. And we're in process with Barnes Fund and Hampton Fund to see if they will support renewal funding. So the funders are hugely important, and actually broadening the number of funders we get, over time will be important in order that we can really broaden our services. The next source of funding was the corporate and the retail platforms. You can see we got backing from the co-op, which I'd particularly like to mention because we got 4,700 from them in the previous 12 months. And that enabled us to, hire in specialist consultants to help us on our new IT platform that we needed. That really made a huge difference. We're also very fortunate that they're backing us in this coming year again. And so I would encourage everybody to register with a co-op as a member, because the more members that select us as their cause, the more money we get. So it really makes a difference. And so we've applied to them to help us on our new website. And so that's what we need funding for, for the current year. And then we've also had some contributions on a much more modest scale from Waitrose, Easy Fundraising, Smile Amazon and Get Lucky Local, which are all retail platforms, and it depends on people, families and our professionals and our ADHD community signing up for these platforms and nominating us as their selected cause. And then finally, but not the least, is donations. Donations are always hugely welcome. And you'll see now that we registered charity, we also registered for gift aid. So, we would certainly welcome donations from you directly. On our website, it's very easy to donate. And a huge thank you to those families who donated to us in the last year, because every bit helps, no matter how big or how small. It all adds to our pot, which we're trying to build. So what are the plans for the year ahead? We've basically got four key things we're focusing on. One is raising more money. And this is where I want to ask you to really very much help us on this. We're planning to do much more activity-based fundraising. So, if you want to do a bike ride or if you want to run a marathon, we would love you to nominate us as your cause and raise money for that. We're also planning to arrange events like fundraising events like that. And then obviously we'll share with you these events, and, we'd love everybody to participate because it's fun. And I think it also just gives you that community sense. And then the other area is the schools your children are in usually have charities that they nominate as a selected charity. And so if you, are asked by schools, or if you could be as bold to perhaps recommend to your child's school that they select us as one of their nominated charities, it would be fantastic, because that really can, bring in nice, sizable, chunky amounts. We know that schools are quite active in raising money for charities. So that's the first ask. The second plan for the year ahead is to expand our team. What we're looking at doing is adding 2 more part-time members, really so that we can broaden our offering, and also so that we can deal with the sort of completing our transition from a voluntary organisation. There's certain tasks that are still quite heavily relied on by volunteers. And I think as we grow up as an organisation, we need to transition it into, part-time team members who can provide that long-term support. And then also, we'd love to have an office space where we could perhaps meet once a week or so on, as a team. The next area is enhancing, continue to enhance our infrastructure. And the main project we've got here is really on our website, and that's why we've brought Sonia in to lead our comms project that we're working on, where we're currently looking at rewriting our website and also rebranding. So Sonia is leading that, and as I said, she started with us earlier this month, and already, she's rolled up her sleeves and has got a good start. And then, we will continue to build the infrastructure, which, obviously Rebecca as ops manager is doing as we build policies and procedures, and, just get some good housekeeping in place. And finally, the next item we really looking forward to planning later in the year is our 20th anniversary celebrations. We will be 20 years old next year. And so we would love to have a celebration probably in the summer of next year. So do, listen out for this, because, we think it would be great, to look back over the years and also involve, some of our alumni, in addition to existing families and professionals who we work with. I've finally got a list of things that I say are really our ambitions for the coming year. And this is where we'd really like to broaden our offering. We get a lot of feedback from families, and the list of things we can provide and what are needed is incredibly long. So there are basically 4 key areas we've highlighted. We'd like to run many more workshops for our parents. We've actually, earlier this year, we started with a workshop for the parents of teens, which was very much focused on teens and relationship building. And it was run as a pilot, and it was hugely successful. And as a result, we're now running that workshop again. It's a 6-week course, and it only involves 8 families at a time. So it's quite a small group. But we're also looking at expanding it, and we're talking to other service providers to offer us more parenting courses. We're talking to another service provider where we're talking about a bigger group of parents being able to participate, and really very much broaden the topics that we cover. The second area that we think where we can have a huge impact is on teacher training. We still find there's an immense need from teachers to learn more about ADHD. And so, we'd really love to do much more of that, and also engage much more with schools. Thirdly, we'd like to run workshops for children and teenagers. Many years ago, we used to do a lot of that. And, due to resource constraints, we actually had to drop that over the years. But now that we've, back and we're building our infrastructure, what we'd like to do is actually focus on also providing a service offering for the children and teens. And then finally, we want to deepen our community outreach. So really heighten awareness of ADHD. We still find amongst the general population, very people very few people have a good understanding of what ADHD is as a condition, and we think, you know, there's quite a bit of educational, you know, work that needs to be done on that. Now, those 4 items I need to just highlight will be subject to funding and will be subject to obviously expanding the team, because the current team are at full capacity. So, you know, that will be dependent on getting the additional funding we're looking for. So with that, I've cantered through it, but I'm conscious we've also got our very exciting book launch. And I would like to very much introduce Jo Steer, who is a senior healthcare professional who works in Kingston and Richmond. So she knows the local area incredibly well. And she's also works very closely with ADHD Richmond and Kingston, and you know, very supportive of the work we do. So Jo has really spearheaded this book on this highly interesting and really topical subject of understanding ADHD in girls and women. We find that often the diagnosis of girls and women is really highly undiagnosed. And I think the book really will give you a much better sense of the complexities, why girls are so different to how the condition is presented with boys. So with that, I'm going to just really welcome Jo, and also Val, who I mentioned earlier, who's our family support lead, and who's also an independent ADHD coach. So she's also joined by Claire Berry, who's a mental health nurse and a accredited CBT therapist. And they've got a huge amount of experience. So with that, I'm going to I'm handing the floor to Jo. Thank you, Jo.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you for that introduction, but also such amazing work you guys have been doing over the last year. And obviously working for Achieving for Children, we're often referring and recommending you to families locally, and I know everyone would want to join me in sharing our appreciation for all the work you've done and all the leadership you've shown over this last year and in such difficult times. Really, it's amazing to see how much has developed in such a short space of time in such difficult times, so thank you. So yes, really, the rest of this evening, what we want to do is have a book launch. Sadly, COVID has prevented us from doing something in person, but we still wanted to really mark the occasion that this book, which has been a while in the creation, is finally on the market to be bought. And so we decided to go ahead and do something a bit more virtual today. And I'm just going to talk very briefly on some of the kind of key highlights around ADHD in girls and women, and then open the floor really for a bit of a discussion. So Claire and Val are going to join me, and we really would invite you to use the chat to ask some questions. So if you have any questions, as I'm kind of highlighting a few of the key issues, please pop them in the chat, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can, and go from there really. So that's the plan for the rest of our time together. So next slide, please. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of an overview of what the book's about really. So we've aimed the book at a range of people really. We want to talk about ADHD in girls and women for a number of different audiences. So one of those audiences is other professionals. This could be education professionals, as Annette already mentioned. Schools are key target for lots of this educational material, but also health professionals, GPs, and the wider professional network that families come into contact with. Parents are really, again, very key for us, and also girls and women themselves. There's definitely something to read in there. I think we've gone on a slide. Sorry, can we just... That's it, perfect, thank you. The book is made up of a number of contributions from a number of different professionals. So I'm the editor, but absolutely cannot take all the credit, because we've got a number of contributors. So Claire and Val are part of the team who have both contributed chapters to the book, but also Dr. Alex Doig, who some of you will know works in Tier 3 CAMS locally at South West London, has contributed a chapter alongside Jess, who's a mental health nurse who actually works over in Norfolk, and has contributed to the assessment chapter with Claire, and then Professor Peter Hill, who I know often supports ADHD Richmond and Kingston with talks, has joined the team in writing a chapter, as well as Eva, who is a local SEN lawyer, who again I'm sure some of you will know and has been part of contributing to the ADHD Richmond and Kingston information over the years. And then we also were lucky enough to secure contributions from two adult psychiatrists, adult medics, who have written the chapters on ADHD in women, and have really helped us to shape up what that assessment might look like, and also what the treatment looks like for adults with ADHD. So the book is full of advice, full of reflections and support and acknowledgements of the difficulties and the challenges that this group of people experience. And importantly, we've also weaved in lots of narratives from women and girls themselves. And some of you may well have been part of that. I know Val pulled together lots of contributions from some people locally, but also there's other contributions that have gone in. So we wanted to really hear the voice of girls and women and help tell their story, as well as providing this advice, because I think that really is what brings the issues to life, and helps people understand, you know, so many of the challenges and battles that are faced by parents, girls and women in this situation. And we know that there's very little books out there for people on ADHD and girls, particularly in the UK. There's a few from the American market, but little in the UK. So this feels like a really good step in the right direction for that market. And as the slide says, really, the data is very, very telling. In the UK, for every one female that's diagnosed with ADHD, there are 6 males diagnosed. And that's in children. And then in adulthood, interestingly, there's a shift so that the ratio becomes even. So for every female, there is a male diagnosed with ADHD. And this does suggest then that there's perhaps some undiagnosed ADHD in childhood that is actually coming to the fore in adulthood. And we know that girls are less likely to be referred for assessment. They're much more likely to be undiagnosed in their ADHD, and they're also more likely to receive an incorrect diagnosis of a mental health condition, such as anxiety or depression, and that in many occasions, that's what leads the way into an ADHD diagnosis. So they're really important facts for us to kind of take into account, and what drove us really as a group of professionals to want to write this book and to put this out there so that we can improve the experience for girls and women with ADHD. So if I could have the next slide, please. So I'm just going to highlight a few issues. I'm not going to go into lots of detail because actually I think this will form a little bit of the discussion as we go on. So as I've already said, we know girls with ADHD are often missed. And the question is, why does that happen? So some of the reasons behind that are that sometimes girls' ADHD is put down to character traits. So hypothesis of ADHD is never really discussed, considered, and instead girls are just labelled as daydreamers or forgetful or chatty, and there's not further thought given to ADHD. Sometimes these girls also aren't very disruptive, and so can go under the radar a little bit, and don't cause significant concern in school. And so perhaps there's less attention given, less concern about them, so less considering of what might be going on here. Although what we know is that those concerns can then creep up over time, and then significant concerns can erupt really. So girls are also known for actually putting quite a lot of effort into hiding their symptoms. So trying to look normal, what we might call masking. I think that's a term that's being used more and more now. So actually, again, it can be harder to pick up on some of the difficulties because some of this masking is happening. We also know that a huge amount of literature and the screening tools that are used to identify children with ADHD are completed by parents and teachers who actually have ADHD stereotypes in mind. So they're thinking about the boys that are bouncing off the wall and never able to sit down. When they're filling in these questionnaires, they're not thinking about ADHD in a broader way, in a way that we know is more sometimes more relevant to girls. And so that can create a bias in parents and teachers, but also there's a bias in clinicians, and there's some research to show that clinicians diagnosing ADHD are more likely to diagnose that in boys. So clinicians were given a description of symptoms of a child and they were identical, except for the name given at the top was a male name or a female name, and the boys were more likely to get the diagnosis of ADHD, even though it was an identical case description. So there is a bias out there, which we hope we can address through the book. And often all the research and the criteria that we use has all been done on male participants and boys. So again, that leads to the bias being reinforced even further. It kind of goes round and round really. So next slide, please. Something we are also aware of, and we've tried to highlight through the book, is that girls can differ in their presentation. I think what's really important to remember is that everyone's an individual, and actually there are also girls that present in a more typical with more typical ADHD combined type, so do experience the hyperactivity and restlessness that we might more commonly associate with boys. So as much as there is a different presentation, it definitely isn't relevant for everybody, and we've certainly tried to highlight that in the book, because we don't want people to get completely fixed on this inattentive type girl and not be thinking about the broader issues and thinking about that hyperactivity and impulsivity. But really what the research tells us and what we've seen over time and all the professionals and working in the field is that very often girls present with much more inattention and less hyperactivity in the physical sense of the word, physical restlessness. And again, that looks very different. So but what's important to note is that actually the hyperactivity in a physical way might present, in fact, as more mentally. So very busy mind, lots of hyperactiveness within what's going on internally for girls. And also we've talked about hypersocial, hyper emotional, hyper talkative, hyper reactive. So a really different way of thinking about hyperactivity rather than what we might traditionally think about. Next slide, please. So why might they be misdiagnosed is also a key feature of the book, and it's really important to hold some of this in mind. And some of you may have had this experience with your own children. and some of the challenges of getting a diagnosis, in that often something we experience, Claire and I kind of have this experience in our assessment work that we do, is that the reports that come in from home and school can vary significantly, and this can create a real challenge in us trying to reach a diagnosis when we're hearing very different reports from home and school. And as part of our job, we need to evidence that the difficulties are in more than one setting. Now, this does create a challenge and can sometimes mean that children don't receive a diagnosis, even though they might be experiencing ADHD. I think over the years, certainly we've been working really hard in the emotional health service to think about ways around this, other things that we can take into account. So we often perhaps receive input from hobbies and other activities that young people are involved with. Absolutely had letters from piano teachers, swimming teachers, and all the rest of it over the years. But also sometimes actually us going out and observing in school can be also really helpful, because it's really hard for teachers. They've got a class of 30. If a girl is more inattentive, they may not be picking that up, but actually one of our team who are trained and focused entirely on that girl can quite quickly evidence some of those difficulties themselves, and that can help us pull things together a bit more. Symptoms are often put down to anxiety or depression. We also know there's a much more higher comorbidity rate with ADHD, so there can be other difficulties that are also present, and that can increase the complexity around the assessment that we might be doing. It's really important to also highlight how girls often present a little bit later to services. So we definitely have an influx around secondary transition, but also college transition at 16. And it's really common that we find that primary schools have done a super amazing job in supporting girls, and so actually have kind of hidden the difficulties, and then when they get into secondary school, everything kind of falls away, the support that they had, but also expectations change from parents, but from teachers and from peers. Suddenly girls really begin to struggle, and the difficulties become much more obvious. Interestingly, in the adult chapters of the book, the clinicians also highlight that presentations in adult women can sometimes follow significant adult life events, such as getting a new job or giving birth and having children, because actually, again, things are shifting in their life and those difficulties become more obvious at that point, really. So we know that these later diagnoses can mean many more years of untreated ADHD, and that this can then lead to difficulties in mental health and self-esteem. So that's something that we see a lot more of. And as I said, Claire and I work in the emotional health service, and a good proportion of the children that we see for assessment actually come in from mental health difficulties such as anxiety and depression. And it's only through our work and our assessment with those children that we begin to ask questions around neurodevelopmental difficulties. And sometimes that's ADHD, sometimes it's also ASD, but then that leads us on to those assessments. And then when we look back with parents and schools, actually there are a number of difficulties that have been present for a number of years, but somehow there's never been a referral for that assessment. So we can then kind of trigger that. So next slide, please. I think we're just coming to the end now. So if you have got any questions, then pop them in the chat and we'll begin to have a bit of a discussion about some of this. Sorry, if you could just go back one, that's it, perfect. So forward one more. There we go. What can we do? So these are just some ideas really about what next, and there's definitely more more to come and more ideas out there, but increasing the understanding amongst the community and schools and clinicians about ADHD in girls is really important, and that's a really big driver behind the book, to try and get the word out there and help people have a better understanding. As I mentioned, schools and home, often there's these different reports, and really one of our kind of main aims is to always remain curious about that and think about what might be going on and what might be leading to those different reports. Absolutely increasing research in this area as being really important. Another point is to make sure that girls are themselves given self-report screening tools, which locally does happen for the kind of teenagers and older girls, really, to make sure that they can express how they find daily life, and we can hear it directly from them rather than relying just on the reports of teachers or parents. It is really important we hear the voice of girls directly and hear about their daily challenges and experiences. Also, to be really clear in our assessments about what support's already in place. So really to understand how much scaffolding, how much extra support a parent or a child, a parent or a teacher is putting in place, so we can work out what young people can do themselves independently, and actually how much extra support they're getting is super important. And really for us to make sure that the strategies we're putting in place and that are suggested are based on needs and presentation rather than diagnosis. And this is because we know that locally and nationally there are delays in children and young people getting their assessments and their diagnoses. So if we can begin to put some strategies in place whilst they're on their pathways, whilst they're waiting for things to happen diagnostically, then we can hopefully get them some early support and early intervention. And it's really important that the schools, you know, we work with the schools locally to help them understand the importance of putting things in place quickly and not waiting for a diagnosis, although that might well be what needs to happen at the same time. And lastly, to really tailor the strategies, and you all know this as parents locally and professionals, that it's so important that we make things individualized and that we don't just kind of treat everyone with a blanket approach. And so, you know, over the years, lots of people have become super familiar with movement breaks and the importance of, you know, letting children with ADHD have movement breaks during the day at school, and that's become much more embedded in our schools. However, for girls with ADHD, it may well be that they need a doodle book rather than a movement break. So that's just one example of how it's so important that we tailor make things to each individual, and that take that into account rather than just assuming that everybody with ADHD is the same and needs the same approach. And I'm sure you all know that anyway as parents, but it's something that we've tried to emphasize in the book, really. So that is like the super quickest whistle-stop tour around some of the key issues. But actually what I want to do now is to try and get some contributions from Claire and from Val, and look at some of these questions that have come in. I could see my thing as was going off. So let's start from the top, from Susie. So she's interested in the comorbidity. Is ASD considered ADHD diagnosis as potentially co-occurring condition of referred via the ADHD? Both conditions have been suggested as present in our daughter, but her referral to CAMHS is for ADHD. Should we expect a holistic assessment? Claire, do you want to answer that? Because it looks like it's referring specifically to EHS.
Yeah, so when our service was set up, because we've only been running for about 2-3 years now, haven't we, Jo? So it was very much that our service would offer an assessment for one disorder, so either ADHD or ASD, and anything that required an assessment of both would go up to St George's. I think what we found is actually there is a lot of comorbidity, and there's more and more coming out about that. So often, so quite a few of our clinicians are actually trained to diagnose both. So for example, I've had cases where I might just be assessing for ADHD, but actually a lot that's coming up is also for ASD. So I will then assess for both. I think the difficulty is that the decision as to which disorder is assessed for is based on the screening tools. And I think we realise that sometimes they don't kind of give an accurate reflection, particularly in girls. So sometimes it gets signposted for one, but actually the more you unpick and ask questions, you start to think actually it does need an assessment of both. So we don't tend to initially take referrals to diagnose both at the same time, but we will do it if we kind of are halfway through an assessment and it looks like it needs it. In terms of the person saying their daughter is due an assessment, I mean, I think any CAM service, it should be a holistic assessment. So if there's anything flagging that looks like there might be ADHD or ASD, it should be further explored. And we would certainly do that, wouldn't we, Jo?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's it. So in the first instance, if it does look like both, it would go to Springfield, to their team. But if actually it starts off being one or the other, and then it emerges during our work that we really do need to rule out or rule in the other condition, then we do that, and are able to do that. So hopefully that answers your question, Susie, around that. So there's also some question around self-screening tools. So what would we suggest in terms of self-screening tools, self-report tools? So I think at the moment locally we use the Connors questionnaire, the self Connors questionnaire. So we use the parent and the teacher one, but we also use the self Connors. So that is what we're using locally. Don't know if there's any other ones out there. Val, have you got any other ones that you use, or in terms of screening tools, or?
Not so much, no, in terms of, I mean, my role isn't really to screen, but when I'm speaking to a parent who may consider that they have, that they're looking at a child who may have a diagnosis, then we would refer them to Connors. So that tends to be the one that we use. Yeah,
I think that's it. Connors is the main one. Also, there's the SNAP, which is free online. Anyone can use that, although that's more for parents and teachers. Claire, is there a SNAP for young people to fill in themselves? Do you know? I don't know.
I wasn't aware.
No, I think
the SNAP's also very kind of a snapshot, isn't it, as well? Whereas I think Connors is a bit more thorough.
Yeah, definitely. And I can see some helpful contributions. So Brenda, hi Brenda, she's also put about the SNAP, and then also the Brown is an alternative tool which can be used. So I mean, there are a range of tools out there. I think locally at Springfield and in the emotional health service, we always use the Connors questionnaires, and we try to keep things consistent between the two services to help keep things as smooth as we can for families, so that we're all using the same questionnaires for schools, but for families, and we in our assessment team at the emotional health service, we have regular supervision with the consultant psychiatrist from Springfield as well, to just really make sure we're aligning things as much as we can.
I think it's really also true, Jo, to say that if you look sort of externally, you'll see something called things like the QB test that actually looks at screening. So there are a lot of new screening tools that are coming up, that are out there, that you may see if you're looking on the internet about how to screen for ADHD.
Definitely, that's a good point, Val. Thank you. So I can see a question from Claire. She says, I'm really curious about what is biologically happening to cause the symptoms of ADHD, e.g. in the brain, the nervous system, the gut. What processes are started and where to create the symptoms? I think that's where, yes. Any takers there, Val or Claire? On this is a big question, and not necessarily specific to girls.
No, Claire, I think I might have to hand over to you on that one in terms of the you two are the experts on it. I can certainly chip in though, so fire away.
I mean, I guess a kind of summary of that is it's to do with the dopamine levels in the brain, but actually it's that there's not enough dopamine being produced, and so that's what the medication is for. I'm just reading the question.
Absolutely. Say I'm less confident to talk about the gut and those other parts of the body, but I think it's an interesting question and maybe something to think about for a future speaker even as well, because actually it would be good to think about that a bit more.
I think it's also true to say that ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition, and as Claire said, it's about the various structures in the brain and how they develop and how they interrelate in terms of how they speak to each other. And it's that those networks are delayed in development as a result of size and maturation, and as a result of the levels of dopamine and norepinephrine, or noradrenaline, as we call it in this country. So we know that those things are delayed and different with ADHD. What we don't know, and there's still a huge amount of research, is what is the genetic heredity of this? Where does it come from? How much do genes play a role in it, and how much is environmental? So we know that the brain can mature and it can change as it develops. It's called neuroplasticity. So what can we do to help the brain develop and grow? So there are lots of elements that are currently being studied with ADHD, probably one of the most researched of the childhood neurodevelopmental conditions. What do we know about it? What are we learning about it? And what we learn is that it's more and more complicated than we thought. So it's not just 3 genes involved. There are at least 45, if not more, genes involved. How do they interrelate with the environment? Well, we're still learning. We don't know, but we can see through scans some real difference in brain sizes. In terms of the gut link, I think there's a lot more work and a lot more research happening in the brain-gut biome, as they call it. So what you eat and how you live actually affects your brain. So we know that diet can actually have a difference. It can help or it can hinder. So some of these things are all still very much in the research field, but it's a really good question. And I think the answer to it will continue over the next 5 or 10 years, to be completely frank.
Definitely, and I think lots of families are often really want to consider the impact of diet on their child's symptoms, and it very much can be a bit of trial and error, and making sure that you're kind of recording things, but also liaising with your GP and thinking about before you make any significant difference, changes to your child's diet, and really thinking about that. And as Val said, it's such an evolving evidence base, and even just thinking about what you were saying, Val, about the brain scans and the differences that are showing up on brain scans. Those differences show up on groups of children with ADHD versus groups of children who do not have ADHD, but it's not it doesn't show up on an individual child yet. We haven't quite got to that point. Otherwise, that would make Claire and my life slightly easier, because we'd be we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. We'd be sending everyone off for a brain scan, but we definitely haven't got to that point yet. But it may well be that is where we get to in the end with this. But it's and I guess the question is whether that looks different again for girls. I think we haven't really heard about that yet. Still really new, these pieces of work.
I think as well, Jo, I was just going to say that also with brain development, we know that for all children that the emotional part of the brain develops much quicker than the thinking part of the brain. So we will see a bit more of that sort of impulsivity. But we just know that with ADHD, that takes a lot longer to develop. So I guess some of it might start off as quite normal brain development in a child that then kind of starts to sway more towards ADHD because it's quite delayed or they're kind of more impaired.
Okay, so thanks for the apology, Claire Taylor, in saying sorry it was a bit of a big question, but actually it's a good big question. So you can see there's a question around does ADHD present differently in girls with high IQ or high intelligence? Claire or Val, do you have a particular kind of wish to answer this?
Certainly in terms of research and evidence, Joe, I don't know. But what I do know is in terms of the young women who I work with, quite often on a private basis in terms of coaching, what tends to happen is that you see a huge amount of highly intelligent girls, maybe not gifted or certainly not diagnosed as gifted, but certainly these are candidates who are Oxbridge candidates who have ended up at Cambridge or Oxford to study, because they're hyper-focusing, they're studying subjects that they absolutely love and have a passion for. So does it present differently? I would think, and I'd be interested in Joe's view on this, or Claire's indeed, is that actually sometimes these hyper-intelligent girls can almost look as though they have aspects of autism, so the ASD, because their ability to focus and to produce such fantastic work is actually also something which can hold them back in terms of their ability to socialize and engage with the environment. So actually you can find that they're very, very intellectual and very, very intelligent, very able to focus, quite often using medication, but still struggle slightly in terms of some of the other social engagement. That's my observation. I'm not saying there's any evidence base to that, but it's certainly what I've seen when coaching A-level students who are Oxbridge candidates. So Joe, I hand back to you for more of an evidence base, but it's certainly anecdotally, you would see a difference, yes.
And I'm not sure that there is a clear evidence base as yet, but I think, to add in anecdotally, my experience is that absolutely these are more challenging girls to diagnose, and because so often people can make assumptions that because somebody is achieving well, that everything's okay. So they're getting good grades, and often there's a conversation about potential, which I think sometimes comes up. So actually, although a girl may be doing okay at school, parents feel maybe that actually she's not performing to her potential, but perhaps school are not too concerned about that because actually she's doing fine and they're not worried about how she's getting on because they think she's doing all right. I think it then becomes more challenging to unpick and look behind that because we're not necessarily concerned about academic achievements, but that can sometimes mask and put people off track a little bit, I guess, in terms of us trying to work out what's going on.
So actually, can I have to ask the host this question, I don't know if it's okay. I've got a very short, it was a video, but I'm going to just play a recording of this girl who I'm talking about. So she's Oxbridge, she's classified as extremely gifted and talented in this particular case. But can I send you what or can you listen to what she made up in a song? She came in, she was incredibly distressed. She was very, very upset, incredibly intellectually able. But this is how she felt at the end of the day. Is it okay, hosts, if I play it?
Of course, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, you don't think that I see you when you stare at me like that, just because I take a tablet, different when I think and act. I'm not saying to ignore it. I'm not saying it's not bad. You don't understand the way you treat me, 'cause you treat me like I'm mad. I'm not ignoring you. I'm not a child that is rude. I'm not a liar. A nasty little brat, I'm out of opinions. I might be a little fast to act, but I'm not a psychopath. And I wish that you knew that.
So this girl came in after a day at school where she'd been bullied, teased, ignored, highly intelligent, highly gifted, and that's what she composed on the spot because she needed to get it out. And I just think these girls are incredible. They have so much talent, but the way we require them to be just destroys them. So our challenge as parents, as professionals, is to really, really hold them, support them and listen to them and realise their talents and recognise that those talents are being buried, shoved to one side, pushed to one side as a result of the systems that we are putting them through. This is not something which is, you can't be proud of it. This is something that you have to tease and you have to find out what's going on for them. And you have to listen to them. That was an awful day, but what came out of it was a fantastic experience, a wonderful composition. And she went away actually feeling that she was okay. And I think that's really important. So yes, gifted and talented. Does that help her in terms of her emotional ability to cope? Absolutely not. But we need to help them find a way of expressing that. So thank you for listening to that. I'll let her know that we played it. She said we could.
I think that was really nice to listen to that, Val. I think I was just going to add as well, I think that we often, well, schools might see a child who's intelligent kind of in the classroom, that they're doing the work, that they're getting good grades, but what they don't see is the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes, you know, and they are working harder than their peers to attain and keep up. So actually these girls are quite exhausted, and it's quite easy to kind of think, well, they're bright, they're doing okay, but actually they're still not reaching their full potential. And I think that's really important that that's considered.
I've got one other thing to say, which is another, sorry, a quote from another girl, which is actually in the book. And it says this, we're talking about coaching, but I think the point she's making is relevant. So the coaching sessions were my sanity, the only space to explore my own mind and my own thoughts and to develop my own solutions. I learned that I didn't need to do things the way others did. I learned that I could produce results in a different way. It was okay to go my own way, to reach my own goals, and I feel so much better knowing that.
So powerful, and I think that absolutely, you know, it just resonates with the absolute importance of really listening to each individual child, doesn't it, and what they've got to say, and their experience in the classroom, at home, in other parts of their world and their lives. So absolutely critical. Now I can see lots of questions have come in. I can see Laura and Ifat have asked around the presentation of ADHD and developmental trauma, and linking kind of how would you differentiate when working therapeutically with young people and prior to screening, and whether the impact of developmental trauma has a similar impact on the production of dopamine. So I think it would be fair to say that we do get quite a lot of referrals where young people have experienced trauma in their lives for all sorts of different reasons. And I think actually that's something that's come up for me a lot more recently, is sometimes the trauma of being in school, and of being in a school who doesn't understand you, and who treats you like they treat everybody else, a little bit like what Val was just saying, and kind of coming across people that have really had quite difficult experiences in school in a traumatic way. But also we know that you know, some young people have very difficult early experiences in their lives as well, and up in therapy for that, and then sometimes we might be identifying questions around ADHD. I don't think there's an easy answer to this question. I think there is definitely something about having some therapeutic input and seeing how that goes and the value of that, and that's sometimes the approach we might take, where we would engage a young person in art therapy or some other therapeutic work, and be continuing to assess and consider other hypotheses. And obviously there are lots of young people who have experienced trauma and also have ADHD and or autism. It's definitely not an either or situation. I think there's commonly a both. And I don't know, Claire, if you've got anything to add.
No, I was going to say, I think there's a lot more research coming out about this, and I'm by no means an expert, but I know that they are talking about, you know, even the impact kind of in utero. So if there's kind of things like domestic violence, how that impacts the development of the brain. So there's a lot more coming out around it, and I think it is difficult because they do present kind of very much the same, and sometimes, like Joe was saying, you can kind of unpick it. Sometimes if you kind of give somebody a therapeutic intervention, that can reduce the symptoms, and then we'll know actually it was more trauma-based. But you can also have both. And I think I was reading something recently about trauma from school, and the impact that can have. But yeah, there's definitely lots more research coming out around that.
Okay. Moving on to the next question around from Claire, do you have any case studies of women who have harnessed their neurodevelopmental differences to achieve success? I'm a graduate of the Royal Academy of Music, and many of your fellow alumni are being diagnosed with ADHD in adulthood. So Val, I mean, I wonder whether it sounds like you see some of these young people and young adults in the work you do in your coaching.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw that question and I thought, oh, good, because I just think it's so important that we recognise the skill set these young girls have, these young women have, these women have. You know, providing we keep them on the right course, providing we keep enough support through those early years, we keep self-esteem high, those talents will go on to really succeed. So you have, you know, there are endless people who are famous with ADHD. I don't particularly want to use those. I want to use people like our very own, and I'm sure most of you know, Eva Akins. So Eva was thrown, she won't mind me telling you this, it's a great story. She's thrown out of school. She was literally sent to a pupil referral unit. She had a child at 16. She was living in it with an abusive relationship. She had self-harm. I mean, all of the things that we know can go so wrong with ADHD. What is she now? She's a top 500 SEN lawyer. She's one of the most used and valued SEN lawyers in the country because she decided and found her passion. And when she found that passion, she found that hyper focus, nothing could stop her. So absolutely we have case studies of girls with ADHD who are fantastic. Andrea Bilbo, who wrote the foreword to this book, has ADHD, and she is chair of ADHD UK, effectively, in terms of the national UK charity. She's also got an OBE for her work for ADHD, and she's chair of the European ADHD organisation. You know, these people are phenomenal. It's just about finding their passion, finding their role, finding their place in life, and then ensuring they have the support in place to do it. Endless film stars, endless musicians, Simone Biles, the gymnast, the gold Olympic gymnast, all ADHD. But they found their passion, they were supported, and my goodness me, have they changed the world. And that's what these girls can do, given the right circumstances and support.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, I know that's something that Claire and I and other people in EHS, we try to have that conversation at the point of diagnosis with families and girls themselves, that this isn't, this doesn't mean the end of the world. It means it's the next chapter. It's hopefully an improved understanding, hopefully a change in support, but at the same time, it can open up doors, and we always talk about the importance of those positive role models, really, and there are less of them in the female world, but absolutely Simone Biles and Emma Watson from the film industry are people that we always try to mention and talk about, and it's amazing. So many girls are just, oh, really? Oh gosh, I wouldn't have thought that. And you know, encourage them to Google and have a look and hear their stories, because it's so important that they hear, you know, what things can happen in the future, and feel inspired to harness some of their strengths, absolutely, as the question really kind of points out.
And I think it's really important to ensure, sorry to butt in again, I think it's really important to say, you know, this is not an easy path. Having ADHD doesn't, you know, because people say, oh, it's a superpower. Well, it is, but to access that superpower takes a lot of hard work. So we can support and we can encourage those girls in how to get through the routine stuff that means you get through your exams. And we can help and coach them to do that. That's the role of a coach. What we can't do is coach, you know, the neurotypical, how to have that passion, that tenacity, that pure dedication to the thing that they love, whether that's music, gymnastics, literature, MP, barristers, whatever it is. I mean, they tend to be fantastic spokespeople. So their ability to verbalise and to show their passion, I think, is second to none. Thanks, Jo.
Oh, thanks, Val. No, really, really good. I'm really glad that question was on there as well. So the next question, which I kind of thought might come up, is around hormone cycles in girls. So again, really important, Helen, that you highlight this around your own daughter's difficulties, and perhaps how they became more apparent when she moved into kind of significant period of adolescence and hormones kind of really kick in, and also noticing then the impact of her hormone cycle around her symptoms and around medication. And you were asking, is this common in girls? So this is definitely something that is talked about in the book. Peter Hill talks about it in his chapter around treatment, but also in the adult chapter on treatment of women. So I think there is a building evidence base. Again, it's still early days. It's interesting that some of this is still being talked about and thought about really in the kind of beginnings of these conversations, but yes is the answer. They absolutely have highlighted that medication can sometimes not work as effectively, and that symptoms can be more significant at certain times of the month. And I think keeping a diary and a record of that's really super helpful, so that you can begin to kind of plot that out yourself. Your daughter can make sense of it, and you can kind of make sense of it together and think, okay, now we know why we're having a really wobbly few days. Actually, this happened last month and the month before, and that kind of just helps you make sense of what's going on, and hopefully kind of find a new way of understanding that. I don't know if you've either of you, Claire or Val, have kind of come across this as well in your work.
Yeah, I would definitely say, just because there is more literature coming out about it, that I definitely do ask about kind of period cycles and ADHD symptoms, and I've noticed that a lot of girls are reporting that symptoms are worse around the time of their period.
I absolutely concur with that. And not only that, but I would have to say, talking about the women, i.e. mums, they would say that during menopause the same thing happens. So prepare for that brain fog, because I think basically those same sort of symptoms are reported during menopause as during the monthly cycle. So it's a really important one to understand.
I would also say, which again fits with the ADHD, but the kind of extreme mood swings as well, which a lot of parents will say they really know when the period's due because the mood swings are just so extreme.
Thank you both. Okay, so I'm just mindful of time and get through a couple of last questions. So Victoria, maybe less of a question, but a good comment really about social, emotional and executive functioning skills being kind of taught more in school, and for everybody, not just for young people with ADHD, and kind of breaking down the barrier of different, and introducing individuality into the language of school and of education, as a kind of concept moving forward.
That's something that I've sort of argued for many, many, many years. We still really haven't got there, but maybe if ADHD Richmond gets some funding, then we can do it anyway, is to support exactly those skills, Victoria, social, emotional, and executive functioning skills during transition. So when they go to secondary school, they have those skill sets. They understand that they're going to be put under pressure with those skill sets, and actually that they're monitored and supported through those first 2 years when they're going to need those skill sets more. I'd love to see it.
Definitely. Okay, and then a comment around exhaustion and feeling overwhelmed, and then the masking making things look successful, but that's a real cost to mental health. And I think that's definitely something that we've explored in the book, and Alex Doig has helpfully written a whole chapter dedicated to mental health and ADHD, to kind of help unpick that a little bit more. Now, Trish, I can see you've said that you suspect possibly ADHD and ASD, and should you mention this in your appointment with Tier 2 CAMS, the Emotional Health Service? I want to know if I can ask for an assessment at Tier 3. She is only 4, so I think you mean your daughter's only 4. So children's assessment for ADHD under 6 is actually done by the paediatrician teams locally. So I think obviously coming along to your appointment with the Emotional Health Service will help you unpick that. Absolutely mention it to the person that you see. Make sure you ask all the questions you need to ask, and say what you're concerned about, and we will try and make sure that your daughter is assessed by the right team. Now, obviously, if she's nearly turning 5, we'll explore that with you and try and work out where the best place is, because there are waiting times, and so sometimes we need to kind of work that out and think, actually, would we be better off seeing someone in the Emotional Health Service or at Springfield, or is it better to pass across to the paediatrician teams? So there's the paediatric team in Richmond at Ham House, but also the Ham Clinic, but there's also in Kingston is at Moor Lane Centre. So I'd say the best thing to do is come for the appointment and explore all of that with the clinician that you're going to see. So also the Divergent Mind is recommended as a must read for women, so we can all write that one down. Thank you very much for that recommendation. I think some questions really around whether the neuroplasticity offers hope that if medication is needed, might it not be forever? So might dopamine production naturally increase over time? So I don't know, Val or Claire, whether you feel you can. I mean, certainly people often aren't on medication forever. They often have breaks or come off of it for periods of time. So that kind of process is checked out a little bit. I just like to say that in terms of looking at how treatment sort of works in working with the families that I do, it looks very much as though medication has a role at a certain time, and as you develop and as you grow up and as you go into different things in life, so your medication needs change. It might be that you have specific tasks where actually you feel you really need it, but then other things start to come into play, like mindfulness, like exercise, where you can manage your ADHD symptoms by doing other things, because you don't have to have the social or the emotional or the academic pressure that you have during this teenage and the school years. So sometimes it can become
what we call a multimodal approach, so that you can use medication, but you can also use mindfulness or running or diet or supplements or something else that you find might work for you. So that would be my view. Also, there are loads more new services coming out from the States, things like trigeminal nerve stimulation, which are and neurofeedback, which are all non-invasive looks at treatment, and some of those are approved in the States already, and they may or may not be approved in the UK. Certainly neurofeedback is something which is becoming increasingly looked at by the National Institute of Clinical Health and Excellence. So I think there are changes, and I think neuroplasticity may well be one of those that actually helps people to come off medication as their life proceeds.
Thank you, Val. So I'm super sorry, but we've got to 9:30. I think there's some, a couple of last comments, and it looks like things have been really, really helpful. So what I'd like to add is really, thanks for having us, and Annette, and for ADHD and Richmond and Kingston. Obviously, the book is out now. It's on Amazon and Waterstone's websites and all those places you can get books. And all the royalties of the book will be going to ADHD Richmond and Kingston, as a significant number of the contributors work locally. So we will kind of support your work and the work that you do with families through that donation. So we'll wait to see how well the book sells, to how well that goes. But yeah, thank you so much, and we've really enjoyed this evening.
Well, I want to say a huge thank you to Jo and Val and Claire. Really interesting. I mean, your book sounds terrific. I would really encourage people to go out and buy it. It's got a wealth of information, some case studies, which I think are really helpful. And also a big thank you for the generosity of donating the royalties to us. We really don't underestimate the value that has, and I'm sure we'll get benefits from it in the years to come. So with that, I'd also like to thank everybody who joined us this evening. It was really a great evening. It was so lovely to see so many people. And we look forward to staying in touch with everybody, and hopefully in the near future we can meet in person. But it was great to have such a full house tonight. So thanks so much, everybody. Good night.